G'day legends, I hope that you are having a fantastic day. Now, YouTube had like a worldwide outage yesterday, so yesterday's video, I don't know if you've seen it or not, go and watch it because it will give this one a little bit more context, and I had to upload it like 12 hours differently, so it won't perform well. But either way, today is a new day and we have a new update. Now, of course, we'll be looking at the maps. We're going to be talking about fighter aircraft, in particular, Russia's bombers, the Su-34. We're going to look at how many have gone down, what actually is the replacement of these as well, and how they're being used differently. We're going to look at a new railway line going in Ukraine. We're going to look at Poland, North Korea, the Nord Stream pipeline, something I think is very interesting, and electronic warfare. But where we'll start is several European countries like Germany, Poland, the UK have said that they're not going to send troops to Ukraine, as well as America has stated that there is no plan to deploy soldiers. Now, this comes after French President Macron's comments yesterday, where he did foreshadow a potential deployment. Now, the way I see it is if NATO troops deploy to Ukraine, this escalates the conflict to what I see as crossing an event horizon into war and poverty around the world. That this goes from a localized conflict to something that I don't think anyone wants. To this, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has said participants at a meeting had agreed that there will be no ground troops, no soldiers on Ukrainian soil who are sent there by European states or NATO states. US National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby has said President Biden has been crystal clear since the beginning of this conflict. There will be no US troops on the ground in a combat role in Ukraine. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov has said about this, the very fact of discussing the possibility of sending certain contingents to Ukraine from NATO countries is a very important new element. We are not going to see NATO combat soldiers deploy into Ukraine to fight Russia. We spoke yesterday about where we may see elements go in, and wherever the war ends, there will be huge training and spin up of new capabilities inside Ukraine. But to fight Russia, I just can't foresee that happening. And the statements we're seeing out of these officials is saying that as well. It would be one political suicide for whoever makes those decisions in democratic countries. And like I said, I think we'll cross an event horizon of warfare. That said, modern wars, they're going to be fought via proxies, not by major countries. Now, whether we see that funding to Ukraine from the West to fight back against Russia, or Iran funding Hezbollah and Hamas to fight Israel, and even further back, we can look at the West in Vietnam and the Soviet influence there, or we can look at the Soviets in Afghanistan and the West's influence there as well. That, in my belief, and I think many will agree on this, that in modern warfare, it's just too expensive, too costly for major superpowers to go at it. And if NATO would get involved, who's saying then that China isn't going to get involved? And how hot does then the war become? I don't think anyone wants this. Now, we are going to have a look at the maps. And of course, here we have Ukraine, the center, the capital of Kyiv, the red areas occupied since 22, and the purple since 2014, just over 2 years and just over 10 years. Now, let's just come down into Bakhmut. Now, we have not seen any change on the deep state map or Syriac map around Bakhmut, although we have reports coming out from things like the Kyiv Independent and Ukrainian channels that there are heavy battles currently occurring in Bakhmut. Now, up north of there, we haven't seen any changes. And then we'll come just south into then Avdiivka, where we have seen the front line dramatically move something in, let's say 10 or 11 kilometers over, let's go 11, over the past, say, 2 weeks. That is a very large movement. The counteroffensive moved about 8 or 9 kilometers, maybe 10, depending right on where you measure it. So no one can say that this isn't a major advancement here, and the collapse of other defensive works, some that have been sitting there for 10 years. But let's have a look then at this from the Kyiv Independent, who has firstly released this, talking about the area here. The Ukrainian armed forces withdrew from Stepovy and Sverny villages near Avdiivka, saying on the 27th. We're going to talk about this Su-34 in a second. So,
Stepove, Severny here, that we have now confirmation that Ukraine has withdrawn from these areas into places like Thankyou, Orlivka, and back out into other more defensive areas. But we don't know when or where this front line is actually going to stop. We have said that it may go another, say, 2 kilometers, as we do have a bit of a natural barrier of the river that runs through here. And we looked at that in depth yesterday. But let's have a look over then the Syriac maps and see where this has changed. So let's just have a look at where we were yesterday. So this was yesterday's map here. As we can see, Severny, Stepove under control here, moving down into Rivka here, which is what the deep state is basically showing. And then let's zoom in further here, that we do see that there was more of a push near Beradachi here, where both sides had come into contact. That is up in here. Syriac is showing more in some areas and less in others, but that there was a close off of territory today heading out towards Olivkia here. So this spire of land right here, that Syriac is saying it more looks like this on the front, and that combat soldiers have entered then this town. So like we spoke about, that the withdrawal from Ukraine was to apparent better positions, but at least the first line or two of these positions have seemed to fall. Now, let's have then a quick look at what Syriac says then about today. This is the first then update we get. Situation southwest of Avdiivka. Russian army reached the first houses of Orlivka after recent advances. In addition, troops begun the advance from coke plant towards the locality of Semenivka. So from the coke plant, saying that the troops then are heading in this direction out here. As we see as well, this natural waterway running through here may have a natural barrier that has a stop to this momentum that Russia currently has. Now, that was the first update we got of the day. Then this was then the second update here. So we can see the confirmation of the ground here and just this small part made here. That clashes between Ukrainian army and Russian army are currently taking place within the localities of Thankyou, Orlivka, and Berdachi. So if we look at where, let me close that. So they're saying Berdachi, Orlivka, Thankyou, which shows grey zone on the Western Ukrainian map as well. So we do know that that is happening, but what it has said is there's just this step out through Stepove on the deep state map. We can roll back and forward. So it's just saying that. But Avdiivka is an incredibly hot area, and I think a very concerning area for how quickly the front line has actually moved here. Now, let's just head down to the south a little bit, and we see the second update on then this map. Now, we see this area here is where Russia has made more territory to the north, heading toward Krasnohorivka, out of area held for 10 years. Of course, this being the outskirts of Donetsk city. Now, interestingly, we said yesterday we want to see things confirmed across 2 maps before we say, yep, there it is. Now, I've got this one as Mariinka yesterday, but this is the same area. Now, it may look slightly different, but for all intents and purposes, where Syriac is showing that this was an advancement yesterday, Deep State has now caught up onto this. And I think this is fairly simple. So we can see this reservoir here, this road turning out into the right, and we can line up that, yeah, these are pretty bloody close. Maybe some difference in the fields here, but again, it's confirmed that that movement across the maps has definitely happened in that area. Now, as far as up and down the deep state map, there is no other changes shown. But what I'll just show you is these fortifications. Of course, the Surovikin line that runs up Robotny front, of course, connecting here and to Verbove, where Ukraine broke into and has cut that off. We have spoken that one of Russia's goals is to try and reconnect these for possible future Ukrainian offensive actions. Now, let's just have a look at then what is said here on Syriac. Situation on Zap front. So this is Verbove that they're pushing out to the west here. 2 days, Russian army took control over new sections of the Surovikin line and adjacent plantations north or west of Verbove. Ukrainian army is still in control over a small section of this Russian defensive line. But as you can see, like I drew them, that we can say that Russia is trying to regain these areas, as this will be very important for recapturing that line, because we actually know that that line did work. And it will be really, I believe, just this paddock here that is shown different. Of course, these images are taken at different times. Now, we're just going to move slightly to the east of here, and we need to talk about Huliapol in here. Somewhere I've actually done a video in here talking with the medical staff and exactly what was happening here when the offensive came and how close the Russian troops actually got into Huliapol as well. So here we have the update here. So we said Mafapil, and it's just closing a bit of gap out to here, although the Surak does show that Russian forces are closer to Shavoni than the deep state map. But let's just zoom back out. Russian army restarted the front of Huliapol for the first time since summer 2023, take control over a big part of the Galiapol dashes. So, of course, the dashes out here, this is like holiday homey areas. So maybe starting a new front line on this. Now, I want to read this from Surak about war crimes. The other day, a video emerged of Russian soldiers killing Ukrainian soldiers who had surrendered. Today, a video appeared with just the opposite. And look, this is two examples, but we know there are many examples of this. Surak says, I think it's fine for you to justify whatever your side does. Personally, I don't think it's fine to ever justify this, regardless of whose side it is. But please, don't have the cheek or moral superiority to label those who don't take sides and don't celebrate war crimes. But this labeling of people who, are calling out, hey, that is a war crime, and then saying, well, you don't support us, that's just wrong. So I disagree with some of this and agree with some of it, but that is what media is all about, is agreeing and disagreeing in certain different elements. I'm looking at the maps over the past few weeks. It does look like Russia has seized the initiative on the front line. Firstly, we know Ukraine has a huge shell issue. They have a manpower issue from reports that morale is low on the front lines. And as well, of course, the money is stuck in the US. And of course, this all goes into not only Russia's ability on the ground, but ability to have influence in the information sphere as well. If they can show, hey, look at we're winning, it may pull people away from then supporting more funding going in. But the ISW has said Russian forces have regained theatre-wide initiative and will be able to pursue offensive operations when and where they choose, as long as they hold the initiative. This is interesting coming from the ISW, as the ISW is super on the pro-Ukrainian side. Yes, it's meant to be a study of war, but it definitely has a huge bias in that as well. But saying that Russia has the initiative and they will choose when and where to fight. And how far does this initiative actually push? We aren't sure. Momentum, having the upper hand of initiative, is very important in this style of warfare, especially if it has turned into an attritional warfare and the informational space has a huge effect on shipments coming in of weapons. Now, we need to talk about fighter aircraft, and in particular, the Su-34 bombers. Now, we are seeing these used more and more, and we are seeing more and more claims of these going down, with Ukraine saying they've shot down 9 in a week. So there was then, firstly, this one at 1000 of a Su-34, and then later in the day at 1400 saying another Su-34. Now, fighter bomber has said that both of these haven't gone down, and he has said nonsense as usual. One thing I will say is fighter bomber has a very good track record of accepting losses and rejecting losses, and no other evidence has been given. And this is something that I'm just not willing to say yes or no to something. I'm not saying these did or didn't go down, but if no evidence is given, word versus word, well, I guess, what do we actually know? But the losses could definitely be higher. And we know that Russia is pushing further and further with these Su-34s, and we know that Ukraine is putting air defense even closer, as we have seen some of these go down. So the risk to the aircraft, the risk to the air defense is definitely increased. Therefore, yeah, seeing an increase in fighters going down, absolutely could see that, because we've then seen an increase on the FAB bombs then dropped on the front line. So let's go into Bakhmut and we'll have a look. So, of course, this is Bakhmut up here. Now, this is Klishkivka and Rivka. Let me give you a bit of an idea of where we're actually sitting. So here we have Bakhmut right here, Kromova, Ivanovski, Klishkivka, these are areas which you'll be familiar with. And we know that Russia's real goal in here is Chasiv Yar and to get the high territory into these areas. So if we look in here Ivanovski. We can see Chasiv Yar over here, and that Russia is gaining some of the high ground down into Ivanovski, and of course then looking over onto Chasiv Yar, because then the ground really flattens out. Then beyond that, on the way to Kramatorsk, what would be the major area in the Donbass for Russia, as well as some high ground around Klishkivka as well. Now, we have footage from near Ivanovski on some of the high ground here, looking into Chasiv Yar of these bombers, these Su-34, which we'll see here, which I think are one of the best looking aircraft just on aesthetics. I think they look great. But we have then this footage here of dropping these Fab glide bombs down into Chasiv Yar. So we know that these planes are being used more and more on the front line. And with anything, we'd expect then to see more losses. This is Chasiv Yar here. Then more hits as well. This footage coming out from Ukrainian soldiers, but of course translated by Russian sources. And you can see trails of where it has looked like aircraft have been. The sky over Chasiv Yar, where we're talking about, the unpunished Russian aviation is flying. So it does seem that they've had an increase in their Air Force's capability there. And just like we saw also in Avdiivka, it seems like there has been an increase in the use there as well. Now, what actually are these bombs? So this is a Su-34 aircraft here being inspected. You can see this bomb said to be a Fab 500 under here. And you can see then the glide wings, which are a new for this war, attachment to these. So the fullback here, which is like the NATO designated word for these. And then we'll see these glide bombs and how they actually work, drop off the wings right here. See how the glide, just with the air pressure, the glides come out. There you go. Giving, of course, a dumb bomb like this much further range. And we can see better footage or better photograph here of Fab 500s with the glide wings under here and a rudimentary GPS GLONASS system on these two to help them go in further. And of course, that is something that we saw a huge increase in success in Avdiivka as well. Now, how many of these are actually going down? So Russia has reportedly about 150 of these planes. Hard to get an idea of exactly how many and how many have been modernized too. And Ukraine's claim has been that they've taken down 26 Su-34. So let's just take both these numbers on face value, that 150 and 26. I know that both sides can say it's significantly different to those numbers, but on face value at the maximum, this is 17% of these over 2 years. Now, is Russia meeting the replacement across its entire fleet of aircraft? Well, some yes, some no. Things like the AWACS, no. Other aircraft, yes. So overall, it's not really known. It depends where you claim, but it's nearer to neutral than no, and some will say yes. And the bigger issue in this is actually the pilots, not the aircraft. It takes a lot longer to train a pilot than to produce an aircraft. Now, this was interesting about Su-34 production back in 2022. That UAC, of course, who builds the aircraft, in 22 has made 4 Su-30s, 10 Su-34Ms. Ms is the more modified, newer variant, 7 Su-35Ss, and 6 Su-57s, which we haven't seen used at all on the front line, or at least no evidence of the Su-57s being used. That's like the F-22 off Wish variant. But he has some interesting observations here. A combination of stockpiling components, import substitution, and probable sanctions evasions has meant that the UAC was able to deliver new built combat aircraft to the VVS through 2022. So I've seen 8 to 10 through 2022, and then people said 2023 was about the same. But as we know, to 24, 25, that Russia is pouring more and more money into their armed service, and these numbers are looking that they will lift as well. So 2022 is below average. 2008 to 22 was 40 on average. That said, it's made up of different types, but is production making up for losses? On balance, no, according to the Oryx database, that of these aircraft here. So it is difficult if you look at it as specific variants or overall of what is actually being made up. And as well, can you really trust the numbers coming out of how many are produced, how many they have, and how many are taken down? Personally, I just don't really believe any numbers coming out from anywhere. Now, let's have a look at this. So this is apparently a Russian column moving past Avdiivka. Now, Cope cage on here, tank, it's not about this. What we're going to see is this tank moves past, and then we see an electronic warfare gun here. So, of course, this like sends out some sort of electronic countermeasure system, mainly when you see a drone. But this guy here is then protecting the convoy, then moving past. You can sort of see him like lasing the tank with it, like behind the convoy as it comes. So I think that is very interesting. It's worth noting too, he does have, if I can get this thing to go down, he does have a second one like slung off him. So I'd say that is a battery thing. And then as the convoy moves past, he's then lasing on them again. So I thought that is something interesting. I hadn't really seen this used like that. I'm sure both sides are using them like this, but there is the threat of drones and the electronic warfare capability to try and then defeat those. I don't know if you guys found it interesting, but I did. Now, we need to talk about this because this is one of the most telling, ridiculous things that I've seen. So Denmark drops investigation into Nord Stream pipeline explosions. That Feb 26th, so is it 28th or 27th today? 28th in Australia, but 27th basically everywhere else. That it dropped its investigation into a series of explosions that ruptured the Nord Stream pipeline in 2022, becoming the second country to do so after Sweden. So Sweden drops its investigation, Denmark drops its investigation. Now, the Danish police have said the investigation has led the authorities to conclude that the sabotage of the pipelines was intentional. No shit. However, the assessment is there is no sufficient basis to pursue a criminal case in Denmark. Now, is that then saying there's no sufficient basis to pursue criminal of Denmark citizens, or there's no criminal case? This to me is incredibly telling. When you see something like this dropped, you know that if it was discovered that it was Russia who did it, or Iran who did it, or North Korea who did it, or whatever, you know that there would be criminal case to move forward, especially when this is the worst ecological man-made disaster we've seen, some will say ever, but for a very long time. You throw a chip packet on the ground in one of these countries, or in Australia, rightfully so, you should get fined. And no, there's no basis, move on. Swedish authorities concluded on Feb 7th, they found no evidence linking the incident to Sweden or Swedish citizens, therefore no further reasons to continue their investigations. This leaves only Germany as ones carrying out the investigation. And I can guarantee that if the information found doesn't fit the narrative, then it will just be like, that never happened. No. Taylor Swift, fly your jet. Tell us to drink straws. But I think we all know what happened in Nord Stream. We can't say exactly who, but if we just look at it logically of who does it benefit to take this out? It doesn't bloody benefit. It doesn't benefit Russia. It doesn't benefit Denmark or Sweden. You know, I think you'll find your answer when you look at it objectively and go, what likely happened here? Now, we need to look at a railway, and we've actually spoken about this before, and some new footage has come out of, it's not the one I want, of this railway here. Now, this is it being built. We've talked about this, I believe, in about November last year. Now, what this railway is trying to do is connect Rostov-on-Don over here through to then Crimea. Because, of course, the Kerch Bridge, this will be targeted at some point. We saw Budanov saying civilians shouldn't cross this. But, of course, this has to cross between Sea of Azov, Black Sea, and is vulnerable. Now, what we know Russia is trying to do is then build this railway. So from Rostov, of course, we're talking about this green and this purple part down here, through areas like Mariupol, Marfapil, and then down through this eastern side where it connects to Ukraine and Crimea, to connect the railway through here. So increasing the supply if then this bridge gets taken out between Rostov and Crimea. And two things to know about train lines is it is vulnerable, but it's also very easy to fix as well. That's why a lot of military equipment gets transported via train. You can move a hell of a lot of stuff. If something goes wrong, it is a lot easier to fix than, say, moving things by plane or even by road to a degree if you put together how quick it is to fix versus how much you can actually carry. So new train line going on there. And, what it is going to be susceptible to, though, is things like if Ukraine gets a reasonable amount of things like ATACMS can get into these areas. This is why we talked that the counteroffensive really needs to get somewhere like Tokmak, and we can see these white and grey. This is the existing train line. So it's going to be a train line. This is going to be sketchy, but somewhere down Mariupol, Berdyansk, Melitopol, and then down into Crimea here. So that will increase the amount of supplies that can move in and out of Crimea, especially if this bridge gets taken down. Although being a hell of a lot closer, it will be more susceptible to more weapon systems that Ukraine has and then will receive in the future. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk today has said that Poland may expand the list of banned Ukrainian goods due to the ongoing protests from Polish farmers on the Ukrainian agricultural goods undercutting their own domestic markets. Now, he said on the radio, standards for the EU and Polish farmers are very high, and there are no standards for Ukrainian goods. Of course, these standards come with being part of the EU. So if Ukraine wants to join the EU, they have to meet these standards. Now, of course, these standards, they just boost the price on everything. So therefore, Ukrainian grain is crossing into Poland. We know that tariffs have been taken away on Ukrainian goods, so then that pushes it down even further, and therefore the grain can be much, much cheaper than local grain. That grain's meant to move on, all these agricultural goods, I won't just say grain, but the agricultural goods is meant to move on to other places. That's not happening, and up to a 50% decrease in the price their local farmers are getting. We're seeing this happening through countries that do border with Ukraine, and 10,000 showed up to a protest against this in Warsaw only today, directly protesting those goods moving in. So again, this is incredibly important for Ukraine's economy, but relationship between Poland and Ukraine is unbelievably important as well, and keeping then that border open. So where this goes, we're not really sure. Now, lastly, we need to speak about North Korea and South Korea and what the South Korean officials have said today as far as their defense chief. So Defense Minister Shin Wok-sik made the assessment as concerns have heightened about North Korea's alleged arms supply to Russia for its war in Ukraine, while their war-torn nation is facing shortages of munitions delayed by Western military aid. So how much Russia is actually getting from North Korea. While North Korean factories operate at 30% capacity due to shortages of raw materials and power, certain factories are operating at full capacity, which primarily produce weapons and shells for Russia. So a lot of factories in North Korea aren't producing, near 100% at 30, but the ones producing the shells, weapons, he's saying that these are really ramping up at, full capacity. And this is where Russia is a great friend for North Korea. Its shortage of raw materials, power, well, Russia's got the most raw material of any country to build things like this, workforce, people to do it. North Korea solve a lot of those issues. And when we look at the amount they're actually producing, you'll be shocked. Now, keep in mind that the West failed to meet its million shell target. It's set for Ukraine by a lot. It was by like 40-something%, failed to reach this. But North Korea is estimated to have shipped 6,700 containers to Russia since the summit between North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and Russian leader Vladimir Putin in September. So not long ago, and we're talking 6,700 containers. The amount is enough to accommodate approximately 3 million rounds of 152 artillery or 500,000 of 122 artillery shells. So a hell of a lot moving. Now, we don't know that every container was full of that, but we know that Russia's shell issues have really been fixed on the front line. Look, a year ago in Bakhmut, the shell shortages were happening, the barrel wear that was happening. Now we don't hear really about any of that in the front line. In return for supplying weapons to Russia, Shin said North Korea appears to be receiving food and other necessities, as well as raw materials and parts used in weapons manufacturing. This is the handshake that we knew would likely come of this. And as well, we know that technology is going to be crossed in. That's where a lot of the danger comes. What technology is actually getting handed off into North Korea. And of course, North Korea and Russia share a border. So we'll pull up out of Ukraine here, and this just shows the scale of all of this. We'll come right across the world. Here we see South Korea, then we have North Korea, and then this small border that's bordering North Korea and Russia in here. And we know that this is where in Vladivostok that Russian President Vladimir Putin met Kim Jong-un, and where the majority of this is going to be moving across. Now, The volume of containers from Russia to North Korea is presumed to be approximately 30% larger than those shipped from North Korea to Russia over the period. So Russia's sending in more containers than it is getting back. That said, it can just be volume. Food is going to take up more room than shells coming back in the swap. If I give you a kilogram of bread, that's not going to be a kilogram shell come back. You're going to need, it's a lot different. Anyway, it seems that food accounts for the largest proportion of shipments from Russia, which is believed to have stabilized food prices in North Korea, while other necessities are included. The minister said Moscow is likely to have provided satellite-related technology to Pyongyang as the country put its first spy satellite into orbit in November and has vowed to launch 3 more this year. So it does look like then satellite tech from Russia has gone then into Korea. Russia was the first ones to put a satellite into orbit. We know that tech exists, although people will say that it doesn't. The real worry here is, hey, yeah, how about you give us 10 million shells and we'll give you an ICBM? That's the danger here. Anyway, the spy satellite is showing no signs of functioning, is merely orbiting without activity. I can't back that up. Let's go with yes. It remains uncertain to what degree Russia will offer technology related to aircraft and ground equipment sought by North Korea. However, if Russia continues to receive more munitions from North Korea, the scope of technology transfer could increase. Definitely could, and it does seem that those shell shortages there have somewhat been fixed, maybe for the time being. So it's just interesting to go over that the South Korea defense minister weighing in on that relationship there. And this is one of the problems that the West is having. This is why the West is looking outside of, say, the EU or America to buy shells, because the cost to make is massive in these countries, even from wages, from materials, whatever, huge to make. And there's a problem where North Korea, you basically have a slave population. It is a shocking, shocking thing. But for dumb weapons like this, can just produce barrels, shells, absolutely en masse. And that's where we're seeing that overmatch of shells currently. I think the Estonian Prime Minister or Defense Minister, definitely Estonia, but was saying that the overmatch of production could be 7-1 or maybe even higher depending where you read. So that is definitely a problem there. And with North Korea and where China is sitting, there's a big boiling pot of mess that can produce just a lot of stuff to go in. Legends, I hope you're having a fantastic day. Again, I apologize for yesterday, but look after yourselves and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.